Okay, picking up where we left off on page 517, we're talking about baselines. And typically when you use baseline, you're typically talking about like a network environment where you record how long it takes to do something under normal circumstances. And the reason for this is if you didn't record under normal circumstances when the system was brand new, 6 months later someone says, yeah, the system is slowing down, you'd go, yeah, I believe you're right. But you'd have no way of knowing, because you didn't record it at the beginning. So if you do a baseline, and do baselines periodically, do a baseline on your database server or your network or your application, whatever it is, then 6 months later when someone says, I think it's slowing down, you could say, well, hang on just a second. Yes, it slowed down by 12%, rather than, yeah, you might be right. So you'd have some actual honest-to-God real data to deal with. Okay. I mentioned to you before about fault management and using the event log. On page 519, they kind of sort of talk about that. That the Windows-based systems has these cool little tools you can put together. For example, you can put up a performance monitor to show, how much CPU is being used and how much disk space is being used, how much network is being used, how much memory is being used. Also, of course, you have event logs, and the event logs are really, really handy. And sometimes the system is screaming at the top of its lungs trying to get your attention, telling you that something isn't right. And so you should be able to watch those. Later on, when we talk about security, looking at the event logs is an important part of keeping up with security. So they talk about system performance management. That's what the section we're in. And on page 520, they talk about the performance and workload measurement, benchmark testing, metrics, response time, throughput, those kind of things. You should record those to be able to use them. And they talk about the definition of throughput could kind of change depending on what it is you're talking about. On page 521, they show some examples of what you could measure to measure throughput. Talking about arrivals and busy time and completion and queue and service time. I'm not going to go through all those, but the bottom line is there's lots of different ways you can measure throughput depending on what the system is designed to do. In a batch world, sometimes it's sort of like turnaround time. How long does it take to perform this? Let's say, for example, at the end of every financial quarter, you did a quarterly report. Well, how long does it take to run a quarterly report? That kind of stuff. So kind of batch related, but still turnaround time. And it'd be kind of handy to measure these things. How long does it take to do a quarterly report? Okay. And all this is designed for capacity planning. So you've got all this data, and you've got a baseline, and as you use the system, it's probably going to get a little slower and a little slower and a little slower. You can use that to say, when it reaches this, we need to put in a new network switch, or we need faster hard drives, or we need more memory for the database server. You have things you can look at and say, because otherwise, you go to management and say, we need more memory for the server. They're going to say, go away. You go, no. See, here's where we were when we put the system in, and here's where we are now. And if this continues, in a couple more months, it's going to take forever for us to accomplish our task. They'll go, oh, okay, I understand. Yes, here, please take our money and go out and buy some more RAM. Very, very helpful when dealing with management. So capacity planning on page 522 is all about those kinds of things. How much disk space am I using? How much memory am I using? All those kind of things. And you can do this what-if analysis. You need all sorts of information. You need accurate forecasting. You need data. You can't do capacity planning without data. And then, of course, you should have some sort of contingency plan. We're not quite into that section talking about preventive maintenance, but it's coming up really soon. Okay. And on page 523, there are some case tools out there, some automated tools that kind of help you with this, that can kind of, particularly they're designed to operate like a particular server, like, for example, SQL Server. There are software packages for Oracle and SQL Server and all those kind of things that will just monitor and look at your server and then spit out recommendation. I recommend you do this, and this. Kind of cool. And of course, you can just use all sorts of other things that you've got. They talk about using spreadsheets and presentation to calculate trends, that kind of stuff. So yes, you can do it yourself. The next one is talking about security. And security, of course, is complex because, we have another one of those little goofy little triangles about the integrity of the data, the availability of the data, and confidentiality of the data. A lot of people don't have a good balance on this triangle. For example, they say, no, you can't have it. So this availability leg of the triangle gets sucked in big time. So they're more important about the confidentiality and the fact that no one has messed with it. But they've reduced it to the point where I have to go ask Mother May I every time I want to get to the data. So the goal of security isn't to hamper you. It's to balance these three things. The confidentiality, so no one gets to it that shouldn't get to it. Integrity, that it remains exactly the way it was. I can trust it. Come back 6 months later, I know no one's messed with it. And then availability, meaning that I can still get to it when I need to get to it, when authorized users are supposed to be able to get to it. Okay. And of course, the idea is, I mentioned before, this is not something that you throw in at the end of the SDLC model. Security is something that's baked in at the very beginning, even in your requirement statement. For example, I showed you guys an example of a financial application in the last chapter where it talked a great deal about the philosophy behind the accounting system being used and the security and controls that were being used. So that was in the requirements document, exactly what type of security was going to be used. Okay, on page 527, they talk about the risk management, and absolute elimination of risk, of course, is not feasible. That's not what we're not. This is not risk elimination. It's risk management. Okay, and it starts basically with kind of like a list of things that could possibly go wrong. List well, let me start over. You start a list of what your business goals are, because if something is very important to the business, then that's going to be very important from a risk perspective. Got it? So if something is not important from a business perspective, if it failed or got corrupted or got lost, it'd be like, no big deal. All right. So risk, gets a ranking based upon the business needs. Okay. So the risk assessment, you have a technique where you can determine, the risk, the probability of an attack times the importance of the data, that kind of thing. So on page 526, they talk about attacker profiles. Well, let me just go ahead and go to that section. Okay. So here's some threat categories of the things that could happen. And we're talking about, extortion and hardware failures could, we had a scenario where we were working in an organization and they were doing maintenance, so they turned the firewall off and forgot. And so for a day and a half, we had no incoming firewall, and we got hammered big time. And it was because somebody made a mistake. So that was human error. Natural disasters. Now, we're talking about threats. We're not necessarily talking about cyber terrorism. We're talking about flooding, earthquake, fire, tornado, all those kinds of things. So, for example, when we say you ought not keep your backup tapes, let's say you're doing backup tapes, you keep a set off-site. And off-site doesn't mean in a closet in the same room as the computers. It doesn't mean in the system administrator's desk right outside the computer room. We're really talking about in another building, because if there was a fire or a tornado that wiped the building out, you could still have some data backed up someplace else. So natural disasters. And then of course there's all these other kind of things. I'm not going to go through the entire list. You can read that. So right off the bat, which one of these do you think causes the most problem? You think it's software attack? You think it's viruses is what causes most people the problem? No, it's generally human error. It's somebody does something stupid. We had a database one time where I'm sitting there doing my thing, and this person came up and said, I accidentally just deleted an entire table out of the database. And I went, Jeez. Okay. Let me do a restore real quick. So we did a restore. 5 minutes later, they came back in and said, I did it again. And I went, okay, I'm going to restore it one more time, but I'm going to come back to your desk and try to see what query you're actually running here. So this person actually blew the database up twice in one day. Amazing. Okay, so people pushing the wrong button, people not understanding queries, those can do a heck of a lot more damage than a virus. I can kind of sort of control, well, I can attempt to control viruses. You know, I can throw procedures in place and software in place and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to an authorized user, a person who has delete permission on tables, does something wrong, okay, there's no software to help me here. There's no hardware to help me here. Only thing I can do is to help train the user. So the users are often the weak link in this thing. Okay. So profile and attacks. So yes, you could have a disgruntled employee. That's a common scenario. I'm not saying that they're all the way I just described, but yes, you know, he could be thousands of miles away and direct an attack against the computer system. That works. And you can break in, you can steal something, you can corrupt something. Most of the time now, the reason why people are breaking into systems is to get credit card numbers because there's money to be made there. Kind of the on page 526, they talk about the skills that are required. You know, to be a hacker requires a high level of skills. For human error to occur requires no skills whatsoever. You can be a complete idiot and still do more damage than a highly skilled hacker. So take a minute to look at that. You know, a cyber terrorist, an employee, a hacker, you know, a script kiddie, and a spy. You know, what their level of expertise has to be to have that to happen. You know, whether or not you need high skills or low skills. And then, of course, on page 527, they talk about the types of things that could happen. You know, there's the backdoor exploit, where somebody has left a vulnerability purposely in a piece of software so that they could have access. You know, denial of service, where, you know, they just hammer your system to prevent you from being able to do anything. And, of course, dumpster diving. That's a cool one. I once wrote a contract that was, you know, worth about $50 million, and we made sure that we shredded all the drafts before we threw them out. And somebody was saying, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "You know, this is a $50 million contract. You know, people get killed for $50 million. I mean, if somebody's going to be spying on us, you're not going to spy on us for a $5,000 contract or a $50,000 contract, but a $50 million contract? Yeah, that might attract some spies." Okay. And anyway, you can go through that little list. That little chart there on page 527 is actually pretty cool. So those are kind of the examples. Alrighty. Let's kind of skip along on page 527 to this little cool thing. These are the security levels. You know, you have the physical security. And physical, I mean, we really do mean, you know, windows, locks, doors. Do you have a cipher lock or some sort of a lock going to the computer room? Do you even have a computer room? You know, where's your network closet? Is your network closet in the janitor's closet in the middle of the hall someplace, or maybe in the men's bathroom over in the corner? Is that where your network panels are? Yeah. Application, file level, procedural level, and users. And just like the cool little metaphor here with the chain, you know, whatever the weakest link in the chain is where the thing is going to break. So you might have the best physical security in the world, but your user can still break things. Okay, this is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.